Welcome to the fourth session on the social doctrine of the Church with an emphasis on political science. In our fourth talk, we're actually talking now a bit more of the nuts and bolts of governing, dealing precisely with economic life. And therefore, our topic today is politics and economic life. Effectively, it will take the coming two sessions, so this session and the one following, and we will deal with a number of issues. Primarily, in the first session, we will deal with the modern role of the state, economic policy and its goals, the economy and morality. As we have seen in the previous talk, it is important to have morality in politics. Equally so, we need to have morality also in the economy, and the concept of the free market. Now, I understand that in this session we are going to talk a bit more on the economic sphere. And as I said, I will try to be as simple as possible for people who are not so versed to economic terms to understand the basic concepts we're talking about. If we had to talk about the modern state, you can divide its role in 5 aspects: citizens' well-being, strategic leadership, having a well-functioning nation, political stability, and international relations. So, if you remember in our previous talk, we said that the state is needed to assume roles which society cannot perform on its own. And primarily, these are the 5 areas one can define as the areas where we need the role of the state. So, to ensure citizen well-being, to ensure we have a well-functioning nation, to have strategic direction as a country, political stability, and international relations. And we will go a bit into each one of these aspects. Let's start with citizen well-being. This is fundamentally the reason why we need a government. If the government's concern is not the citizens' well-being, then effectively we don't even need it. We could do better without it, if I had to say. So, government's primary role is precisely to ensure that citizens are given the necessary attention. The value within the social teachings of the Church is human dignity, because of their human dignity. And so we talk about the safeguard of rights of children, promoting of a society where the individual can flourish, so the need of having good education systems, ensure that we have equal opportunities, that the society is fully employed. We know that work and having a reasonable pay is a very important principle within the social teachings of the Church. The state is there to provide security, otherwise crime will take us over, to protect consumers, and to ensure social cohesion, so as much as possible we eradicate poverty, and also provide essential services, the country's infrastructure, hospitals, and any other form of service that the country needs. So, if you look at the items I've mentioned, the citizen is always at the center. It is what the citizen needs, but which the citizen cannot deliver himself. And therefore, since the citizen cannot deliver them himself and alone, then we have the state who is able to provide those services, infrastructure, or goods that are required. The second important role of government is strategic leadership. Where is the country going? Taking cognizance of the state, of the reality, of society, and how do we improve it? The strategic direction, which ultimately influence a lot of political, economic, and social choices. And therefore, these strategies usually are given in very broad terms. So the government may say, our strategy is to have full employment. Everybody has a job. Or that we reduce poverty. We increase literacy. We reduce the emissions so that we will have a better environment. Those are the strategic objectives that the government sets. These will also influence what government will do, like on an international level, what position the government takes on certain international laws, dealing with the environment, dealing with poverty, dealing with a lot of other social issues. But also very important is political stability. In reality, a society only moves forward if there is political stability. And if you had to study why countries do better than others, essentially, not necessarily because they have the best form of government, but it's because they have political stability. There's no real chaos, so the citizen can actually flourish because there is proper order and stability. This is therefore critical for development both within the economic and social sphere. But this is very much dependent on the political class. It is the political class that many times brings instability. Now, either because of the ambition of wanting to hold to power, and therefore, for example, not willing to wait for the change of government through a democratic process, another side starts creating political instability. It could be because democracy is very fragmented. I mean, you see countries where they have so many political parties that they don't have real political stability. A government is only there for a year. I mean, within Europe, Italy is a perfect example for this. For a lot of years, they used to have elections every year and a half because they were not really having any real political stability. It is very hard to build a good, sound economic country. Very hard, but it's very easy to break it. And you break it with political instability. A case in point, Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was one of the richest countries in Africa, and for many years it actually was the one most developed. They had an election in 2009 which was very much disputed. This created a lot of political instability. The country has not come out of that instability, and today it is ranked as one of the poorest countries in the world. In the previous talk I mentioned Libya. Yes, it was a tenuous situation. You had Gaddafi who ruled over the country, but you had economic progress happening. There was a revolt. Unfortunately, the revolution did not bring a proper government in power that gave political stability to the nation, and today it is a country in chaos and people are worse off. So political stability is essential to have proper social and economic progress. The fourth important role of government is that government creates a well-functioning nation. The state needs public administration. We need civil servants. To have an economy that functions, you need a government that can create the opportunities for investment, jobs to be created, to deliver products to consumers. There is something as simple as an economy needs money, and the government assumes the role of actually what we call monetary policy, providing money to the economy to be able to function. To ensure that we have the right infrastructure, we need roads, trains, planes, basic infrastructure like sewage, and all the other things that a country needs, transport, communications. These are things that only government can effectively provide to have a well-functioning nation. Health and education systems. In some countries, how the country's natural resources are actually managed. Sustainable development today is a very big issue, the environmental concerns and environmental issues, and also basic things like civil protection, security, police, law and order. So these are the important structure, the justice system that we need to have a well-functioning nation. And the fifth role is international relations. No country lives in isolation. We live in continents, we live in the world, we live in regions. In some regions there is more instability than in other regions, and therefore countries need to work together to bring peace to that regions. A lot of countries today join together, like the European Union, like the African Union. You have even the Union of South American Nations, because it is understood that nations need to work together, and only states can play that role in effectively bringing nations together. So it is the role of governments in that sense is very important. But those are what I would say the 5 top-down realities of why we need government. But then when it comes to the influence of political and economic decisions, there's also the bottom-up realities. So, but what is the state of the economic development of a country? How many poor people, illiterate people, old people? What is the society I am trying to lead? That is critical to be able to take the right political and economic decisions and understanding. What is the state of the economy itself? The state's public finances, the balance of payments, which is how much does the country really export when it compares to what it imports in terms of goods and services. The quality of our human resources. What are our education systems like? What is the level of health systems that we have in our society? Do we have any natural resources? The level of development. Are we in a situation where we have an inflation? So prices are going high, too high for society to keep up. So these are all issues that governments, when they come to take decisions, have to take account for. The technology, the innovation in the country, the environmental considerations, and all the other aspects. So the bottom-up approach to coming to take policies and decisions. In Centesimus Annus, John Paul II says, economic activity, especially the activity of a market economy, cannot be conducted in an institutional, juridical and political vacuum. So the emphasis is very clear. We cannot have a modern, well-functioning economy, I would say society, if we live in a vacuum. So the state has a responsibility to build the parameters within which a society works. On the contrary, it presupposes sure guarantees of individual freedom. So as we said in the previous talk, while there is a role for government to lead the country to create these parameters, there is the important principle of subsidiarity. That means the government cannot impinge on the freedoms of the individual. What the individual can do for himself, the state should not try and replace. Otherwise, we will be actually impinging on the human dignity of the individual, which is the fundamental principle in the social teachings of the Church. And therefore, individual freedom includes the right for private property, which we will deal eventually in our sessions, that you have a stable currency, that you have an efficient public service. So clearly, even the Church acknowledges this important role of the state. However, the role of the state has to be person-centered. We have said this also in our previous talk, that fundamentally politics is there for the well-being of the individual, of every individual, not of some, not of the majority, of every individual. And for this reason, in a recent document issued by the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith in the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, a very long named department within the Vatican, which came out with basically the teachings of Pope Francis on the economy, says, for this reason, progress within an economic system cannot be measured only by quantitative and profit-driven standards. Today in society, when you hear a lot of politicians speaking, even international institutions talking about the well-being of the nation, we talk about growth, the GDP, the gross domestic product, which is how much the country is producing, or the GNI, how much income, gross national income, how much income society is producing. But okay, that's a very generic number. But who is earning that income? We know that in the world there is a lot of inequality. A lot of income goes in the hands of very few people, not of everyone. And this is the key concern of the Church, that the need for equality, the need for proper distribution, but also the need for other values in life. So I continue reading from the document. It says, but also on the basis of the well-being that extends a good that is not simply material. So society is not just about money, profit, the wage I have for my job, but there is also other values that the state should be promoting. The value of the family, the value of solidarity, values which are important within society. Let's go a bit in the theory now of what is economic policy. You can divide economic policy in three types of policies, what we call fiscal policy, social policy, and monetary policy. So I know I will give you these terms because I'm sure that if you are going to public debate these subjects, these are terms which you will have to understand and also be able to talk about. Fiscal policy is basically the decisions government takes in terms of how the government collects revenues and spends the money it collects. That is fiscal policy. So what is the type of taxation the government actually imposes on society? And taxation is a common good. Government need taxes to be able to provide social services and address inequalities. Otherwise, the inequalities will grow. So there's nothing wrong with taxation. But then there's also an important principle. How is government administering the money that it is collecting? Is it really spending that money for the common good? Is it really being used to address inequalities, social services, education, health? Or is the money, unfortunately, going for the wrong purposes? We see a lot of poor countries investing in military hardware rather than in addressing provision of water to a lot of villages in Africa. This is a common, recurring problem, for example, in Africa and also in other countries in the world. So that is primarily fiscal policy, how the state collects and distributes money through taxation and public spending. Also, the management of public debt and surplus, but not many countries actually do a surplus. Many countries do public debt. How do we manage that without hurting the economy and society? That is an important aspect which we'll talk about in fiscal policy. Then there is social policy. It is very much linked to fiscal policy because social policy is part of the social spending part within fiscal policy. So how does government actually use the money to address illiteracy, unemployment, social exclusion, equalities, and all these very important issues that deal with poverty? Something which, as we said earlier, the Church is concerned about, and that is why it emphasizes on the theme on the preferential option for the poor. Is our social policy really addressed to eradicate poverty? And that is therefore an important discussion we need to have. And then there is monetary policy about money. Somebody has to provide money, otherwise we cannot trade. And we need to trust that money. Why do we trust it? Because governments provide it through their central banks. And therefore we can say we can buy and sell with that money because we trust it. Unless we have money, the society, the economy does not function. Money is like the blood veins, I'd like to say, in a body. Unless the body has blood flowing, in reality, with all our good intentions, it will not work. So money has a function. Now, economic policy has to have goals. Otherwise, you cannot really plan, like anything in life. If you're building a house, you say, my goal is to have 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms. Then you have to design the house to have 3 or 4 bedrooms. So if your goal in economic policy is economic growth, you want to see the economy to grow, then the policies you adopt have to be policies that help the economy to grow. Or if you want full employment, you have to have policies that ensure that actually jobs are being created. If you want price stability, that means that you do not have a lot of inflation, so that prices are not going up so quickly that people face hardship because they cannot afford. Then you have to take measures to address inflation. And these are actions actually that governments can take for the common good. Now, economic policies can take different forms. You can have an industrial policy, a national development plan, especially if you're a country still in development. Some countries, because they come from a more leftist ideology, a socialist ideology, may have a nationalization plan, so nationalizing certain companies which they feel it's in the common good that the state actually runs them. Some of the countries actually go the other way. They have privatization plans because they believe that the state should not have entities that it runs, but they should be run effectively by the private sector. You can have an incomes policy to ensure that wages and salaries in a country move up in line with inflation, so that you ensure that you always keep a fair, adequate level of income for everyone. A healthcare policy. For the environment, a sustainable development policy, a national resource plan of how to use your resources better. So the situation of a country feeds in to the plans that actually a government many times does. A good government issues its plans even for public consultation. That's why the Church, as we saw, emphasizes on the importance of participation. Participation for the Church is not about just going to vote, but at the important levels and decisions being taken by society, there is public participation. And it is clearly advisable, if you want to have a good government, that when these sort of plans are being developed, there is effectively public consultation. Why do we need all this? Because in reality, resources in the world are limited. And therefore, because they are limited, somebody needs to manage how we can maximize what we produce from those resources to reach everyone. Again, the principle of stewardship, that the world has been given to all humanity, not just to one person. So the benefits of what grows, if we have to take it in terms of food, has to reach everyone. Till today, it still doesn't reach everyone. We still have billions of people, millions of people in poverty. It is estimated that we have about 1.4 billion people still in poverty or earning less than $2 a day. So clearly, the world today, what it produces is not really being effectively shared to all. And this is the role of states at a national level, and when they come together at an international level to support each other. So the economy, the Church clearly teaches, is part of God's plan. It's not like when we talk about the economy, that's something, religion has nothing to do with. It's actually, some people think money is a bad thing in itself, so, we don't talk about it. No, actually, the Vatican Council too, in Laborem Excelsum, clearly says that throughout the course of the centuries, men have labored to better the circumstances of their lives through a monumental amount of individual and collective effort. To believers, this point is settled, considered in itself such a human activity according to God's will. So the actual economic activity for the Church, it is settled. It's a good thing. We need it. However, what the Church emphasizes is that at the center of that policy, we always come to the same recurring theme. We need justice, and I remind you in the previous talk when we talked about justice meaning social justice, and the other important point that we have recurring holiness. Holiness. Because we know that unless the individuals have encountered Jesus, they cannot understand the principle of sharing, of loving, of solidarity. So these are two fundamental principles also in the economy. So strangely enough, for some, the Church actually talks that the economy has to also be a place of salvation and sanctification. So the economy, how you live in an economy, is an opportunity for you to be saved and to be sanctified. Obviously, if you live the principles of love for the poor, of solidarity, of justice, of integrity, of truth, and all the principles we have talked in the previous talk. So the economy has a use, but it is not the end in itself. And this is the problem with the world today. Today, the world is putting the economy as the end in itself. The important thing is that I'm economically better, richer. I have a car, I have a house, But we forget that the economy is not there just to serve me, but it's there to serve everyone. So the economy is not an end in itself. It's not just about the graphs of the GDP going up, but it's about how it is actually reaching everyone. And if it is not, it is betraying its purpose. And that is why the Church puts into the economy the principle of morality. And the compendium speaks extensively on this issue, on the need that morality is at the center of the decisions we take on economic and political level. If we throw out morality, as society is trying to tell us today, by advocating that we are now a more secular society, and therefore morality, you see it, you hear it even from politicians say, no, it's not about morality, it's about ethics. But ethics actually come from morality. Ethics evolve from a moral order. If you don't have any morality, you don't have ethics. Because on what are ethics being established? And therefore, it is important to understand this moral dimension of the economies, which shows that economic efficiency and the promotion of human development through solidarity are inseparable. So it's not about just the economy growing, but human development. Unless the growth of the economy is not leading to human development, then if there's that break, there is a problem with the economic system. So therefore, the production of goods is a duty to be undertaken in an efficient manner. So the Church is not saying it is wrong to be efficient. However, we cannot be wasteful of the resources. And therefore, economic growth has to benefit everyone. And this puts a big responsibility on the free market. So again, even the Church is not against the free market. It calls it an institution of social importance. So the free market in itself is a good thing. But the Church says a truly competitive market is an effective instrument to attain important objectives of justice. So we cannot leave the free market on its own. It has to lead to justice. And therefore, the need to moderate excessive profits, the need to respond to consumer demands, the need for efficiency and resources, and all the other aspects. So the Church does not see the free market as a negative thing. Actually, the free market can help to moderate. But when it does not, then there is a role for the government to intervene to be able to bring order in a free market that is not necessarily addressing the issues of justice. And therefore, again, the issue of consciousness of every individual's and public authority comes into play. Individual profit of an economic enterprise, although legitimate, the Church teaches, must never become the sole objective. So, for every economic reality, for every economic system, there has to be social usefulness. And this is very important. Now, we know that the free market has limitations, because the free market, left in its own stride, in reality, will, yes, distribute resources, but in effect can easily increase disparities between the richer and the poorer. And therefore, there is where the intervention is needed. And in Centesimus Annus, Pope John Paul II, who clearly advocates the good of the market economy, but also brings into balance these limitations and says, it is strictly a duty of justice and truth not to allow fundamental human needs to remain unsatisfied, because the market may leave, and today still leaves, a lot of people unsatisfied, and not to allow those burdens by such needs to perish. We cannot allow the people who are burdened with those needs to be rejected, to be forgotten, to be ignored. And therefore, the state needs to address these issues of inequality. I will close with a message on wealth and enterprise. Again, wealth and enterprise in themselves are not bad things. God actually tells us to multiply. That means it is not a bad thing to make profit, to increase one's wealth. But wealth puts a huge responsibility, moral responsibility, on the wealthy. So you may think you're very lucky if you're wealthy, but in the eyes of God, you have more responsibilities because you need to think of others. Because profit is not intended just for oneself, but wealth creation, the church teaches, is there for everybody to benefit from. So while the teachings of the church teach that it is only rightful that you have your own property, that you have your own wealth, but we also have to be generous with others. And generosity means that we actually do not close our eyes for those who are poor around us. The gospel, there are a lot of quotes you will find in the presentation dealing with this issue, but clearly Jesus comes very strongly against that rich man who had a lot of wealth and decided to build a lot of storage to put his wealth in and forgot that there are the poor people. Jesus said that person is condemned, and therefore it is important that we realize that that storing wealth for no purpose, just to have more property, more money, more cars, more anything, in reality risks one's salvation. So wealth clearly exists to be shared, and as Christians we also need to be freed from the need to have more possessions. It is within us that we want always to possess more. That the church teaches us that is a big burden and a big risk. So wealth is good, it comes from God, but it needs to be enjoyed also by others. And this is a fundamental teaching of the Catholic Church, which we will close this session with. Thank you.